Thank you. Sorry about the chat situation. I think that is getting resolved now, but feel free to use the Q&A. We can see it and we can go from there. Again, if you're interested in the continuing education, Nicole has a link in the chat where you can go ahead and register for continuing education. But otherwise, welcome. My name is Rebecca Shepard. I'm a tax attorney here at Frost Law, and I'm here with my law partner, Peter Huckabo. And today we are talking about uh, tactics, trends, and traps, I think. Trends, traps, and tactics for IRS exams. Peter and I have been through a slew of IRS examinations, whether it's income tax, employee retention credit, regular refund, abatement, appeals, um, and are happy to share our experience with you. I've been a tax attorney for the last 15 years, same as Peter, and in that amount of time, we've seen it all. So we will get into that, where the current status is of the IRS, where we are with funding and exams. I think people were really excited when there looked to be an increase in budget for the IRS to see some actual complicated and high income earner examinations rather than the smaller claims. I think that's kind of gone by the wayside with the new administration and the Doge and the kind of cutting of funds, but we'll get into all of it coming up. So with that, I will kick it on over to Peter.
Hey, everybody. So interestingly enough, the new data book came out on Friday. So we have last year's data. The trends here with audits and exams, it's been downhill over the last couple of years. The big trend from briefly looking at the data book on Friday for the 2025 fiscal year was really a push more into correspondence audits away from field audits, but we'll go through sort of what those are. But the audit rate is historically low. It had started to tick back up before the pandemic, and then with the pandemic, you've seen a pretty consistent drop off, both in individual and in business returns, sort of across the board. Large business and international, there's going to be audits in those types of cases. But a lot of the audit and exam activity that's happening these days is related to employee retention credit issues and sort of very specific type issues. But sort of big trends, again, audit rates are continuing to decline. You see individual returns greater than $1 million have a higher audit rate. But most of these categories all of these categories are below 3%. And that is true of, business as well as personal. Then sort of what are the types of audits that are happening? And again, this is fiscal year 2024. I think if you look at 2025, you're going to have more that sort of band at the bottom related to correspondence examinations be larger, field examinations be smaller. And as they rely more and more on data scientists and data that they have in their computers and whatever the heck Doge did while they were in there, you're going to rely more on technology, AI, in order to identify audit-rich areas. Ask yourself whether or not that's a good thing, because some of the audit issues that are easily identifiable or more readily identifiable related to things that AI or technology can catch is because of required reporting. Typically that's happening on lower income individuals and non-business owners. So the sort of one-to-one computer matching, those types of things are stepping up. And so you're seeing simple things from like math error notices and assessments related to that to automated underreporter issues where somebody left off a 1099 or something along those lines, um, as opposed to digging in on some of the higher income individuals or issues related to K1s. Like working through those issues is much more labor intensive, more challenging, more human capital is going to be employed. And so as the IRS is working through a massive reduction in its workforce over the last, year, they're sort of figuring out, I think, what they can do with the resources that they have.
All right, types of audits and what to expect. So, um, office exams, um, I haven't seen in a long time, and those used to be kind of like the Schedule C, um, income tax exams, where the auditor is in the office. You have to go bring all your stuff, kind of sit at a table, go back and forth. Um, and then you have time to go back afterwards, but it's usually resolved pretty quickly. Um,
I haven't done one since 2018 or
it's been
like
a minute. Yeah, I don't even see them though. It's not even just we haven't done them. Like I haven't seen them come across. So I'm not sure how often they're really even occurring. This is like a medium audit. So, the field audit is going to be the most, it's going to be the most invasive. It's going to be the longest process. You have 32 IDRs and all different kind of spaces. And then you have a correspondence audit, which is, the least involvement with the government. So an office audit is in the middle. It's like the Goldilocks. Usually you could get them resolved relatively quickly. They weren't super complicated, but still stressful for your client. You want to make sure you're doing all that you can to prepare and make sure that the auditor understands the documentation you're putting forth, but they weren't super technical or something where you needed more of advanced government employee kind of working it with you. Um, like I said, field audits are the most intrusive, the most comprehensive. You're going to have a more higher trained individual that you're working with. That person's going to understand more of the ins and outs of the type of tax that you're looking at. Usually, um, it's going to be income tax, but it's going to be more of a haul there. There are definitely times where I've had field audits where I've gotten 12 different IDRs, and each time you have to respond and go back and forth. Make sure you're applying on time, make sure you're providing the best information, make sure you're responding to the notice as it is sent. You don't need to provide any additional information, but the revenue agent involved in a field audit is going to be spending a lot of time in the books and records of the business. So you want to make sure that what you're providing is accurate, clearly detailed, and like logical in flow.
And one of the things with field audits is typically they'll push for taxpayer interviews. To the extent you're representing a taxpayer in these, I would say think critically and think strategically about having your taxpayer submit to an interview. We're hired as representatives to step in the place or to represent our taxpayers, and so you have the opportunity to interview your client and represent their interest to the service. Certainly, there's times where it may make sense to have a taxpayer interview, but this is always one of the interesting things with field audits is the extent to which you want the taxpayer to be um, before the IRS. And there was an interesting article recently by one of our colleagues, Karen Lapikis, who wrote an article in Tax Notes about situations where the IRS tries to disregard a 2848 and making sure that you know your rights and your client's rights and are are able to assert them when they try to go around a representative. Um, it happens.
David asked that he's seeing more auditors be adamant about interviewing the taxpayers, that a trend you're seeing, and how to push back tactfully when the auditor is adamant. Um, you can push back and say, I'm the representative of the taxpayer, and I will step, like Peter was saying, I step into, it's Steed, and I will be answering all questions. Now, having said that, you need to be really prepared for that interview. You need to understand, how did the business develop? How did it begin? What are all the operations? You need to understand soup to nuts that business. Otherwise, if the auditor doesn't feel like you're answering their questions properly, like you can always say like, oh, for that I need to get back to you, and that's fine once or twice, 3 or 4 times. But if you're doing that for every single question, they're going to summon your client. And you don't want that. So make sure you're ready to go for that interview. That's going to take probably 3 prep calls with your client to understand fully that business, I think.
Yeah, and you have to fully know the business. It's not a wink wink like it is. You got to get in and understand what they do, why they do it, how do they earn money, where do they get clients, like
How do they
all those
get their
types of
income? When do you
things.
start? Yeah.
Yeah. So quickly, just to run through, when the reorganization happened with the IRS in the late 90s, rather than being territory based or geographically based, um, IRS operates through various divisions where similarly situated taxpayers are grouped. SBSE is small business and self-employed. Um, this is where most of the individuals happen. Individuals, sole proprietors, self-employed individuals, small businesses. These audits happen, and the key really is substantiating the numbers. So every return that gets filed gets a diff score to the extent it is varying. There's a variance seemingly in a material amount. The IRS will audit it. You'll see situations where somebody has a 1099 for a
Peter, I'm
hundred
going to
thousand
stop you for a second.
dollars. Oh,
There's a
there's a
polling
poll.
question. Just want to make sure everyone can see it. Sometimes with the pop-up blockers, they can't. So I just want to make sure. If you can't see it, then put something in the chat to Nicole so she can, help troubleshoot for you.
Yeah. Um, you'll see situations where somebody has a 1099, but it's completely wiped out by expenses. Those are situations that like SBSE on a Schedule C would come in and take a closer look at.
And your state is going to look at those too. I was a hearing officer for the Comptroller of Maryland for 3 years, and those were quite often, even if the feds didn't audit those cases, the state certainly has a flag for your expenses equaling your gross receipts, or, sometimes they exceed year after year.
Yeah. Sort of on the opposite side is large business and international division. There's higher audit rates here. These are larger businesses, much more complex. Um, Issues like transfer pricing and R&D and cross-border stuff. Um, these kind of cases, you're really trying to limit issues, I think, more so, focusing the IRS on particular issues, but they may come out and park themselves in the business's office for quite a while, to the extent they may even have permanent office space. To the extent you have very large taxpayers and routine audits, that kind of stuff can happen as well.
And they're allowed to open other issues as they see them. Like that's not something you can push back on, but it's something that you can try in your responses to kind of keep things limited so the audit doesn't kind of like spiral.
Yep. And then the last big one is TEGE, which is tax exempt government entities. Um, Very specific type issues. that are unique to these types of entities, private benefit stuff. But it can also sort of bleed over. You could have an employee retention credit issue that is being evaluated by TEGE as well, even though for the most part those cases are SBSE. But you want that. These are specialized people. They understand who these taxpayers are and the types of issues that they're dealing with, um, beyond just the actual tax issue.
Back to basics with correspondence audits. So for those of you in the ERC space, and I just kind of poked my head into the attendance list, so I know some of you are, you're seeing, or you have seen quite a few of these information document requests through correspondence audit for the employee retention credit. I've had 5, I think, field agent audits for employee retention credit. I've had some cases that went from the taxpayer advocate to an auditor that wasn't necessarily a revenue agent, more of like an office exam. Those are quicker. And then the vast majority are through these correspondence audits, like over 100. That is what we've typically been seeing for the employee retention credit, and you'll get a very simple form that you're going to respond to. Um,
Even when the IRS started to wake back up, after the pandemic, they were doing correspondence audits related to, I think I had like 2 back-to-back ones related to gambling losses.
yeah, they go through phases. There's a bunch of gambling losses in there, which would be interesting, going forward. Usually it's like mismatchy stuff, things that are flagging, but the employee retention credit, they've used the correspondence audit as a way to filter through to see what's a gross receipt claim. This is my opinion and not fact. What is a gross receipt claim versus what is a, partial suspension claim? The gross receipt claims, they seem to be working in exam, whereas the suspension cases seem to be going to straight to appeals. One issue we've had quite a bit actually with these correspondence audits, specifically with the employee retention credit, is there's an option to upload your response. You can also FedEx your response. I'm a paranoid person, so I make everyone do both. They are happy about it. And we get letters saying they've gotten nothing. The IRS has nothing and they're disallowing our claim. So then we have to file a protest to show that not only did we upload it, but we've also submitted via FedEx. Their systems just aren't catching up with each other. So no matter how you're providing the information, it's possible the government's going to tell you that you never provided it. So just kind of be aware of that, because I think if you're not, it can be very scary and off-putting that, your client's going to get something that says you didn't do your job. If you do it my way, you will take a screenshot of your upload and you will also do a FedEx and have a confirmation delivery. These audits are able to be extended. You can request an extension and typically they are granted, but it doesn't necessarily happen before the deadline. So always respond by the deadline date. And then if you need to supplement, you can request the supplement in your response. And then when you get a letter with a new date, make sure that you supplement by that date. Do you have any other comments on?
No, I mean the correspondence, at least this iteration of correspondence audits, you're not dealing with a particular person. And so you really have to put your best foot forward. And I think we'll talk through some strategies and how to respond.
Here we are. So yeah, again, just a lot of what Peter and our practice is centered around right now, the employee retention credit. Like I said, we have over 100 in exams, and then in appeals, we've got more still waiting for an appeals officer to be assigned or in appeals. Want to be very careful in making sure that you're putting your best foot forward in these responses. If your client says, I'll respond to the exam notice, you do the appeal if it gets disallowed, please dissuade them from doing that. They're going to put information that's not helpful and that's going to work against you. And all of that becomes really relevant when you're in appeals because what they're going to be considering is what you've provided in exam. Um, so just try to advise against that. That's not necessarily the best strategy. Um, Even though you have another opportunity in appeals, you want to make sure that you're providing that record so you can be the one to have control over what's in there. This is still me. Um, so in the notices, they're going to request information about eligibility, wage qualifications, qualified wages, and then how you calculated the credit. Make sure, like I said, that you're as responsive as you can be without providing information that's unhelpful. Exams that we've gotten from folks that are not us that have provided answers such as like, no one wanted to come to work, and so I couldn't have anyone. I wasn't able to do my job to the best of my ability or run my business to the best of my ability. It's not very helpful. It's not going to get you a good result in appeals. Even if you have everything else lined out, that one bit of information is going to be working against you. This is what it looks like. All right.
So what comes with the 6612 that was on the prior screens? 6612 is really just like a cover letter, but it's attaching an information document request. Um, IDRs are used in field audits, but also in these correspondence audits, and it's sort of the call to a call and response as far as the IRS is concerned. So um, they're going to identify the questions that they have and what they want to ask about, and your job is to respond and to provide documents responsive to it. Typically, they'll give you about 30 days to respond. Rebecca mentioned that um, you can get an extension, but in a field audit, you know, talking through with an auditor, what's the plan here? When do you think this audit's going to close? What is the timing? Um, are all appropriate to ask about, just so you can help your client look around the corner a little bit. Um, but typically it's 30 days, at least with the ERC stuff. Sometimes it can be shorter. Um, but this is how the IRS is going to communicate with you. Um, One side note is, to the extent you're involved in any audits, and these are ERC audits, but related to PEOs, trying to get a copy of the IDR that the IRS issued to the PEO is important. Um, it's possible that the PEO is asking for less information than is truly being requested. That could hurt your taxpayer. Like, you want to make sure that you're being as responsive as possible so that there's not an opportunity for the IRS to say no. Um, Responding to, an IDR, consider
You
your
had sorry, you had something on the back of the bottom of the slide which talks about how IDRs are not optional. Don't um don't get cute with responses. You can wind up getting your client summoned and then you don't have an option of filling in for them. So just be thoughtful in what you're doing if making sure
But beyond summons, protect your license.
right, circular
Uh,
230 is where I was going.
Circular 230 requires practitioners to be responsive with information that's not privileged. If there's privileged information, understanding what that privilege is and why is going to be a very powerful tool to know what you don't have to turn over. There's a limited exception related to accountants and what may not be responsive. That is far less than privilege. So what is provided for in the code is far less than attorney-client privilege. These are just issues to work through. But yeah, I mean, Circular 230, if you're not responsive or you play games or you get cute, you could get a referral to OPR. And like Rebecca said, they will issue summonses. Summonses are not self-enforcing, but I've been involved in cases where they file suit and say, Judge, enforce this summons, make this taxpayer appear, and dealing with those types of issues. And another pop-up has come.
You know? But yes, reading Circular 230 very carefully, making sure you understand if you've got information that the IRS is requesting and it's not helpful to your client, think about how best to present that information. You can see whether or not you're required to provide it, but most likely, if it's bank statements and things like that, they can get those anyway, and you are required to give it. So, um, just understand that.
It, it's a little bit different with LBNI, but generally the same idea. You're having a conversation. Like at the end of the day, keep in mind that you're working with somebody, a human, typically across the table, with some of these, but to the extent it's an audit that is, not just being as responsive and sort of the thing that we always tell, or at least I always tell, is you want to make it as easy as possible for the IRS to just say yes. So however you're organizing your information and being responsive, you want to make it as easy as possible for them because they have quite a few cases, especially with some of the staffing changes.
And that goes for everything. Anything you send to the government, I always say follow the order that they've given it to you, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but um you want to be the practitioner. They're like, oh, thank goodness, I've got Peter. All right, I know this is going to be highly organized information. I know he's not going to mess around. Like, I know that I can put this information together, and that makes you a better advocate for your client because the government is not upset to work with you. And that's not to say like you shouldn't push back when you need to, ask for managers calls, do all of those things, but do it. Your advocacy is going to go further if you didn't hand somebody a pile of junk, like putting it together nicely, making sure it's clear, making sure that you're responsive is going to help you, whether you're with the revenue agent, whether you're with a manager, whether you're with area director, whatever you need to do, it'll help get you to that spot. I think we've already kind of hit this on the IDRs. This is just what it
I
looks
think
like.
just trying to show you some of these are dense, like extremely dense, and these responses can be extremely dense. And in a situation like this, you can see at the bottom, it just says tax examiner, NA. There's no person on the other side of this. And so you've got to be as responsive to some very dense materials. And so adding an executive summary or, summarizing some things can be helpful for the IRS because you also, again, you have a Circular 230 requirement, but also the files just may be large and the substantiation, and it can be overwhelming for the IRS to take a look at.
So with that, we make sure that we have a table of contents, that we bait stamp, that we pin site, that we do everything that we can to draw the eye to the examiner to help them get to yes, get to understanding, like checking the box. Like they've got a checklist they need to go through. You're trying to make it as easy as possible to get there, and understand how you would want information presented. And this also saves you later when you're in appeals and they say something like, I didn't get that, or, audit didn't get that. It wasn't included in the records. Like, well, I provided it and this is the site and this is how I gave it to them. So they understand and they can't fight against it later. In litigation, you're going to need to have something similar. Um, so again, like hyper organization, hyper like pretty packets that you put together are important. All right, traps. Overbroad requests. you can push back. Provide all communications or documents related to something. Um, it's time consuming, it's burdensome, and it's not something that you really even know how to provide that information. So you'd want to make sure that you push back on the revenue agent and say, and this is not going to be necessarily with like a correspondence audit, you would provide as much as you can. But like if you're with a revenue agent, you can say, I need you to clarify. Can you narrow the scope? This feels really broad. Um, Same when something is ambiguous or vague, you want to make sure you understand exactly what they're looking for so you can provide the proper information. You don't want to be providing information that's going to be outside the scope of the exam. You also want to make sure that you're providing complete information. And so if you don't understand what they're asking, there's a chance that you're not going to be responding in the proper way. And so making sure you have clarity, revenue agents are happy typically to work with you in these cases with this type of stuff, with language and making sure that everything is clear. It doesn't need to be an antagonistic response. It needs to just be like, hey, I need some clarification here. Like, what are you looking for? Can you give me an example? Can you reword this? Um, and for the most part, they want to make sure that you're clear as well, because it doesn't help them if you start giving them random stuff that has nothing to do with their request. Um, Follow-up IDRs are going to happen all the time, regardless, but just you try to limit those as much as you can. Um, and ambiguous or vague wording can get you there. Um, Unreasonably short deadlines, usually those stem from the revenue agent thinking that you're not being responsive or thinking that you're not providing everything. A lot of times with IDRs, you'll be providing information and saying, I need to supplement 3 later, I need to supplement 5 later. To the best of my ability, here's 7. However, we're waiting on SunTrust to get back to us. SunTrust isn't even a bank anymore. Truist to get back to us. As the documents had to be downloaded, making sure that you then do get those supplements in, because then what will happen is if you don't meet the deadline that you all have agreed upon to get the supplemented information provided, a new IDR is going to be issued. And one, again, this like puts you in a bad spot with the examiner, but also to your client, they're looking and seeing like, hey, they already asked for this. Like, what are you doing? In order to like, it could be their fault and you haven't explained it properly to make sure everyone's on the same page. So you want to make sure that one, you're continuously communicating with the revenue agent when you need more documents or you need more time. And the same with your client. Make sure that you're communicating with your client to tell them, like, okay, we submitted, like, here's already our response. Do you agree with it? Yes, perfect. I'm going to send it to the agent. Once they've received it, they understand the next steps, and you're continuously explaining what's due, what you still need, and like how much time you need to review before you give it back to them, before, it goes to the examiner, because that can take some time too. You don't want to just send blindly, like your client sends you like a stack of stuff and they're like, okay, this is responsive to 3. Like you need to review it, make sure you're giving yourself enough time to do that. Um, if
And
an agent
sometimes we were talking about interviews. Sometimes when the auditor has follow-up questions, they'll throw them into an IDR, and that may be like an invitation to an IDR that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten. So being prepared for that interview and talking and answering authoritatively as opposed to like, well, I'm gonna have to get back to you. They may list out a whole bunch of stuff for the follow-up questions, and then as they're typing that up, think of X, Y, and Z else to put on there as well. And so making sure that you're answering those questions to avoid the invitation to a second IDR or third or whatever it is important as well.
also, because like I don't know, some agents I think actually do like issuing 13 IDRs, but some don't. And they actually do want to get this resolved as soon as possible. And so you're keeping their case file open. They do everything by like how many days open, all of these things. They don't want to have old exams. They don't want to be looked at as they're not working their cases. And so the longer this kind of stretches out, you're putting more pressure on them as well to close it. And you don't want an agent to feel pressure to close an exam because that's usually not in your favor. I can't see the page number. Is this you? Is this me?
No, it's still you.
Look at that. Best practice. Clarity. Use plain professional language. Be as clear as you can be. Make sure people understand what you're providing. You know, the field agent IDRs and responses, there's a different level of training and complexity, I think, to those exams where you may be able to use more technical language, but I never think it's a bad idea to just be as plain as possible and make sure everyone understands what you're talking about, make sure you're all on the same page. Again, label and organize your documents clearly. Um, Bait stamping exhibits is very helpful in being able to pinpoint exactly where in the documents you want the reader to go. For an employee retention credit claim, that would be like the paragraph of the order that's relevant to your taxpayer, the company, versus the 38 pages of the order, because you want to provide the entire thing. You don't want to look like you're not providing any more information. Mosh wants to know if there are any more polling questions. Probably. Nicole, is it time for another polling question? Do you have two more to go? There are two more. Okay. You got 20 minutes. Nicole, send one out. Sure she'll do it shortly. They're random. She doesn't get a choice. Look at that. When you're pinpointing to an order, that's one thing. If you're providing bank statements for an income tax audit, you don't necessarily need to pinpoint anything, but it's important to show like the range of those documents where that ends to the next set. And a table of contents, I think, is very helpful for the auditor to look and see exactly what you've provided and to show what question it's answering, because sometimes the documents are going to be answering multiple questions and multiple IDR responses to make sure that that goes through. Completeness, if something doesn't apply, say it doesn't apply, don't just leave it blank. You want to make sure that you're not hiding the ball with the government. You can't mislead. You answer the question that's asked of you, but don't, again, like get cute with your responses. If you think that what you're providing is going to have a follow-up question or follow-up request, you can include your response. I wouldn't necessarily include more documentation unless it's being asked for, but you can explain why this is important or why this is irrelevant. This is not business income. This was a vacation property, that kind of thing. Timeliness, meet the deadlines or request an extension before it lapses. No one wants an extension request at 4:57 p.m. on the day it's due. If you understand that you're going to need more time, getting that done ahead of time is very helpful. If there's something that happens, there's a storm, there's a health issue with your client, those are things that are important to document. Oh, hey, Mosh, here you go. Here's another poll. All right. I wasn't done.
Were you not done? We
I
can go
was
back.
not. It's fine. Don't
Okay.
overshare.
What all you got?
I stay ahead of escalation. So LB&I moves fast. Like way faster than typical exams. They also have different procedures when they don't think they've been answered properly. And so just make sure that you're watching all of those quickly or carefully before you provide responses to LB&I. They're not down for extra extensions, typically. Right? Don't overshare. Everything you're providing is now part of the record. That's part of the record of the exam. It's going to be part of the record of the appeal. If you take it to litigation, it's going to be part of the record of litigation, for better or for worse. And so make sure that you're careful and thoughtful. And this kind of goes back to the beginning. Whereas if somebody else is handling the exam, that's not you, anything can be in there. You have a lot of landmines possibly to deal with where it could have been better had you started from the beginning. So, be thoughtful about that. You don't want to create new issues. You don't want to create a longer audit, and you don't want to create a problem between you and the revenue agent if you don't need to. Oversharing can reveal errors, inconsistencies, or noncompliance that can cause other problems, can trigger exams elsewhere, which you don't want. Um, I'm sure I don't need to say this to all of you, but again, with my paranoia, make sure that you track everything that goes out the door. You have a copy of it. You have a copy of when it was received. The mail has gotten incredibly worse. So start mail everything, track what you're doing. So that way it never comes back that you did not provide it. Most revenue agents at this point, you can email information. So even if it's too big to email through their portal, you can at least email the confirmation that it was sent. I suggest doing that again, like overly communicate with your client, overly communicate with the government, and then everyone feels much more controlled as far as like the timing of the exam and feel like you're not, jerking them around, like that you're preparing and being thoughtful and making sure that you're complying with your deadlines. Um, there have been so many cases that we've both had to deal with where people send things in with no tracking, and it is horrible. Because the government, as I said, we submit 2 ways and they don't get it. With confirmations both times. So imagine what happens when you don't do something that is trackable. It can just get even worse. Um, yeah, how to advocate, request clarification, make sure you understand what's going on, make sure the agent's not using vague language, make sure you're clear in what you're providing. If you need more time, ask for it as much as you can in advance without being like, next month I'm going to be busy and going on vacation. I'm going to need an extra extension here. Like that's not good. But like, again, not right at the last second. Um, if something's already been provided, this is the loveliness of the bait stamp. You can cite it in your response. This was provided. These were the bait stamps. Please let me know if you need another copy. Um, your client shouldn't have to pay for you to do something twice. I mean, that's also like a judgment call if you think it's going to be easier just to provide it. But if I've provided it already, I usually would cite it there.
And
Um,
oftentimes the strategy with these is like limit them from opening it up. So I think you can also like if it's like very clear what triggered the audit and it's like a single issue, single year thing, like lean into that and really like the last slide was don't overshare, but like if you know what's going on and you know it's not in other years and you're like, hey, this is the issue, taxpayer messed up, they need to fix it. I think you can lean in a little bit as well as part of advocacy.
sure.
All right. Practical issues in audit management. Um, Setting client expectations
This is the
is,
hardest thing.
yeah. And I mean, they think that you're just going to be able to step in for them and shut down an audit or mean that the IRS doesn't, get to do their digging. It's not how it works. The IRS is permitted to audit. Again, practitioners have an obligation to respond. Um, I think it helps to talk through clients of like, listen, I'm a gatekeeper. I'm not going to give them anything they're not entitled to. But I need you to give me full information. It's a role of an advocate to also educate. So, I'll explain to you what's going on. You're going to make decisions about how to proceed in certain circumstances. Um, and I mentioned it earlier, but like an initial conversation with an auditor of like, what's your audit plan here? When do you think we can have this closed? And sort of revisiting those types of things. Stuff happens in audits and it doesn't always, go to plan, but I think it's an opportunity to, set the client expectations and then also set expectations um, with the IRS as well. Um, Great. Next slide. Um, just a lot of those same issues. You are on the other side of the IRS, but building credibility with them in your writing, in your correspondence, being timely, being responsive to their requests, being fully responsive. understanding what do they want to see. Hey, if I get two things on this day, do you want me to wait till I have all six, or do you want this because you know you've got a couple hours carved out? And you'll get different answers. Understanding that they realize that they have a bit of a thankless job, and so being respectful and courteous, um, and working through issues as they arise. Um, Rebecca said previously, like your client shouldn't have to pay twice for you to submit something, um, but there's a way to do that that's gracious and refocusing someone or um, realizing that it's a human on the other side of this as well, and not just um, a big bureaucracy, which certainly is. But um, this is another opportunity for advocacy is fully understanding what privilege is, and when you have to disclose something and when something's privileged and how to deal with it. Um, Again, there are CPA rules and accountant rules in the code as well. They are not as extensive as attorney-client privilege. There is also opportunities where counsel may hire CPAs or other tax professionals under what's called a Covell agreement. We could do a whole presentation on Covell agreements, but there are situations where IRS, or excuse me, tax counsel needs help, and we need the help of an accountant to understand something related to the accounting, or the tax issue itself. And so privilege can extend to tax professionals who aren't attorneys, understanding the extent to that privilege and what may happen to that privilege when returns are filed or things are sent in to the agency, is going to be important in how you navigate some of that additional information. Um, and then just escalation. This is managing the IRS as well. So counsel or an IRS CPA, whoever's representing, you've got to manage your client's expectations, and then you've got to manage the
This is the
IRS's
last one, guys.
expectations.
Hooray.
And that can be tough, but making sure that you're building a strong foundation with that agent so that you hopefully can work through issues as they arise is going to be important to a successful audit. And then how you sort of protect yourself in situations where you're dealing with challenging IRS agents, document everything, talking to managers. Asking for a manager conference isn't a particularly aggressive thing. IRS revenue agents understand that there's going to be times that they disagree with counsel or with a taxpayer, and sort of the appropriate escalation is to say, hey, can we do a quick call with your manager and just talk this out? Doesn't always mean the taxpayer wins or gets its way by any stretch of the imagination, but it's at least one way to take a little bit of the pressure off from what may be a tough interaction with the revenue agent. Um, Also remembering that these are audits, and you may have different result in appeals. Taxpayers have a right to an independent forum, um, and these audits can continue into appeals, and really understanding your rights within appeals and what the issues are, and how an appeals officer should be analyzing something. It's another different presentation entirely, but something to consider appeal strategy, with some of these issues. And all of this is like you agree to as much as you can, and you limit what um, is out there afterwards, and agree to as much as you can agree to, and continue with your client through the appeals office after.
The road ahead. Um, so what we think, and ERC is going to be here apparently forever. COVID was forever ago, but here we are. Um, but the IRS is also leaning heavily into AI right now. And so I think there will be more correspondence audits going forward. Again, these like mismatchy things, um, to see to help generate, revenue to kind of support the gap of people that have left. There's going to be is there another, is it just these three that are on there? Is there another slide? Okay. That's my thought as far as like hot button issues. The ERC is still probably like the greatest, is the largest like portion of it for exam right now, I would think. Do you have any other thoughts there?
No, that's what's taking up the most bandwidth. I
Resources.
agree with you. I think they're going to try to do more with less, and so it's going to be a lot of um, information return matching and low-hanging fruit. Digital assets are certainly
They're up there.
something that they're looking at these days.
So if you prepare tax returns, being thoughtful about that, making sure that if you've got digital wallet stuff, that you're asking for maybe a couple more pieces of paper to make sure that you're papering your file well and you're ready if there is an issue. Um, that's helpful. Leonard's asking for how long can they audit on the ERC refunds? The problem is not all of the refunds have been paid. So, and if it's prepayment, they can do what they want. Post payment, the majority of the claims, the statute's closed. Um, but Q3 is still open. And then we've seen a huge spike with PEO exams, and PEO claims that have been disallowed. So that's like a whole different beast in that you're not able to represent the client necessarily. The PEO is the client. The PEO is not going to give you 2848. So you need to work with the PEO in order to be able to provide the information and to be the advocate in that case. Like, I want to speak to the auditor here. I don't understand this question, vagueness, ambiguity. Like, you want to make sure you understand, and then you can have an opportunity to explain why you think that, their initial determination is incorrect. It just adds like an extra fun layer of trying to, be a advocate for a client in an exam and then going through the appeals process with PEOs. But yeah, hopefully the exam portion of this stuff is starting to wind down. There are less IDRs that I'm seeing, but we won't see them for a few months, and all of a sudden we'll get a big spike. But the PEOs are the big things right now as far as exam.
Yep.
Um, well, thank you guys so much for coming. If you do have questions about an exam or anything like that, feel free to reach out to us. I think I'm behind as far as people I'm supposed to respond to, so I apologize. But we will reach out to, we will respond. If it's urgent, call us rather than email, and then we'll make sure that we carve out some time. But truly, we've done so many of these. We're happy to help in any way to help kind of work with you to make sure that you're giving your client the best foot forward that they can. Um, just want it's better for us as an industry for everyone to take these things seriously, make sure that they're providing good products, so that way examiners, agents, revenue officers, whoever you're dealing with in the government doesn't like dread seeing your client represented. I think I'm also supposed to say that if you guys have enjoyed yourselves this afternoon, if you would like to give a review, we would take it. Thank you. If you have any other questions, though, let us know, and we will see you next